The screen came from the frozen woods just before midnight, and Elena Marsh was the only one who moved toward it instead of away. Everyone else in Blackthorn territory had already turned in for the night, the great wooden gates locked against the cold and against whatever wandered the dark pine forest beyond the border stones. But Elena heard something that made her blood go cold in a different way. A small broken sound, not quite an animal, and not quite human, coming from the ravine near the old creek. She grabbed her coat and slipped out through the side gate before anyone could stop her. The guards on duty barely noticed her leave. As a low-ranked Omega, Elena was rarely noticed at all. She had learned to move through Blackthorn like a shadow, unseen and unbothered, which suited her fine most nights. Tonight it meant no one questioned why she was walking into the tree line alone in the dark. The sound came again, weaker this time. She followed it down the slope, her boots sliding on wet leaves, until she found him. A boy, thin as a branch, lay curled against a fallen log. His clothes were torn and soaked through, his lips a pale shade of blue, and his small chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He could not have been older than 10. There were no other footprints around him, no sign of parents or pack, as if he had simply appeared out of the trees. Elena dropped to her knees beside him and pressed her fingers to his neck. His pulse was there, faint but steady. She pulled off her coat and wrapped it around his shaking body. Then, without a second thought, she lifted him into her arms and began the long walk back to the pack house. He weighed almost nothing. By the time she reached the gates, her arms were shaking from the cold and the effort, and the 2 guards posted there stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "What is that?" one of them asked, not moving to help. "He needs a healer," Elena said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the night air. "Now." They still did not move, so she pushed past them herself, carrying the boy through the courtyard toward the healer's quarters, ignoring the whispers already starting behind her. The healer, an older woman named Dorothy, took one look at the boy and ushered them both inside without a single question, which was more than Elena had received from anyone else that night. Dorothy worked quickly, checking his breathing, warming his body, forcing thin broth between his cracked lips when he was finally conscious enough to swallow. "Where did you find him?" Dorothy asked without looking up. "By the creek, alone. No one else was there." Dorothy's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. A boy alone in Blackthorn Woods in this cold does not survive by luck. Something protected him. Elena did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and simply stayed by the boy's side through the rest of the night, watching the color slowly return to his face. By morning, the news had already spread through the pack like fire through dry grass. Elena Marsh had brought a stray into Blackthorn territory. She was summoned to the Great Hall before she had even eaten breakfast. The hall was already half full of pack members standing in small clusters, murmuring, watching her walk in with tired eyes and yesterday's clothes still on her back. At the head of the room sat Victor Hale, the pack's second in command, a broad-shouldered man with cold eyes and a colder smile. "I hear you brought home a stray last night," Victor said, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Did you check if it bites first?" Laughter rippled through the hall. "He is a child," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "A child who was freezing to death in our territory. I was not going to leave him there." "Our territory has enemies on every border," Victor said, leaning forward. "For all you know, you carried a spy straight through our gates. Or worse, bait. Did that thought cross your mind? Or were you too busy playing the hero?" "He is 10 years old," Elena said. "Maybe younger. Whatever he is not a threat lying half frozen in the mud. That is exactly what a threat would want you to believe." More laughter. Elena felt her face burn, but she did not look away from Victor's gaze, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "Regardless," Victor continued, waving a dismissive hand, "you will not use pack resources on some gutter wolf you dragged out of the woods. Dorothy's medicine, the food stores, none of it is meant for strangers of unknown blood." "Then I will use my own share," Elena said. "I am not asking the pack for anything. I am telling you what I found, and what I did about it, because someone should have known before the rumors twisted it into something worse." Victor studied her for a long moment, something calculating behind his cold eyes, before he waved her away with a bored flick of his wrist. "Do as you like with your own portion, then. But do not expect sympathy when that thing turns on you one night while you sleep." Elena turned and walked out of the hall, her spine straight even as her hands trembled at her sides. She spent the following days ignoring the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. In the dining hall, at the training grounds, even near the well where the younger pack members gathered water, she heard the same words repeated in different combinations. Foolish, reckless, naive. Some called her worse, questioning what kind of Omega risked her own standing over a stranger's child, as if kindness itself were some kind of weakness to be mocked. She did not argue with any of them. She simply returned to the healer's quarters each evening after her duties were finished, sitting beside the boy's bed, coaxing him to eat a little more each day, speaking softly to him even when he gave no response. On the fourth day, his eyes opened and stayed open. He watched her with a caution that broke something in her chest, the same wary stillness she had seen in stray animals that had been kicked one too many times. He did not speak. He barely moved, watching her the way someone watches a stranger they are not sure they can trust. "You are safe here," Elena told him gently, keeping her voice low and even. "No one is going to hurt you. Do you have a name?" He shook his head slowly, his throat working as if the words themselves had been lost somewhere in those frozen woods. "That is all right," Elena said. "We do not need to figure it out today." She began calling him Kale, a name she had heard once in a story as a child, something that sounded strong and gentle at the same time. He did not object. In fact, something in his shoulders seemed to ease slightly when she used it, as if having a name at all was a comfort he had not expected to receive. Dorothy pulled Elena aside one evening as she was leaving. "The pack elders are talking," she said quietly. "Victor wants the boy gone before the week is out, says he is a liability." "He is a child who cannot even tell us his own name," Elena said. "Where exactly does Victor expect him to go?" "That is not the question they are asking," Dorothy said, her eyes flicking toward the hallway to make sure they were alone. "The question they are asking is why you care so much." Elena did not have a full answer for that, not one she could explain in simple words. She only knew that when she had found him in the woods, something in her had refused to walk away, some instinct deeper than pack rules or reputation, and she was not willing to abandon that instinct now simply because it made others uncomfortable. "Let them ask," she said. "I am not leaving him." Over the following 2 weeks, Kale slowly began to eat on his own, to walk short distances without assistance, to sit near the small window in the healer's quarters and watch the courtyard below with quiet, careful eyes. He still did not speak much, offering only single words or small nods, but he had started following Elena with his gaze whenever she moved around the room, as if she were the one steady point in a world that had otherwise turned unpredictable and frightening. The pack, however, had not softened. Children whispered when Kale was walked briefly through the courtyard for fresh air, some of them openly pointing, calling him strange or cursed under their breath, believing he could not understand their words. Adults were somehow worse, offering polite nods to Elena's face while their eyes lingered on Kale with open suspicion, as though he might sprout claws and attack at any moment. Elena absorbed all of it, letting none of it show on her face, because she had already decided something the night she carried him through those gates. Whatever came next, whatever the pack thought of her choice, she was not going to let a frightened child learn that kindness was a mistake. One evening, as she helped him into a warm blanket by the window, Kale finally spoke a full sentence for the first time. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice small and rough from disuse. Elena knelt down so she was at his eye level. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "That is all the reason anyone should need." Kale looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his young eyes, before he nodded slowly and turned back toward the window, watching the moonlight settle over the quiet courtyard below. Neither of them could have known, on that ordinary cold evening, just how far the consequences of that single choice would eventually reach, or how the entire pack that mocked her would soon be forced to kneel before the very boy they had once called a stray. The morning after Kale spoke his first full sentence, Elena was called before the pack council again, and this time the mood in the great hall had shifted from mockery into something colder. Victor Hale stood at the center of the room, flanked by 2 other elders Elena recognized only by name, Grace Whitmore, and a stern-faced man called Oswin Frost. All 3 watched her enter with expressions that made it clear this meeting was not a formality. "The boy has been here nearly 3 weeks, Victor said before Elena had even reached the center of the hall. 3 weeks of food, medicine, and shelter spent on a stranger who cannot even prove his own bloodline. He is a child," Elena repeated, the words feeling worn now from how many times she had said them. "He does not owe anyone proof of anything." Grace Whitmore stepped forward, her voice softer than Victor's but no less pointed. "Elena, you must understand our position. Packs do not simply absorb strangers without knowing where they came from, or who they belong to. There are wars fought over less. If his people come looking for him and find him raised inside Blackthorn walls, it could be seen as an act of aggression. Then let his people come looking," Elena said. "I have seen no sign that anyone is searching for him at all. He was left in the woods to die. If someone wanted him back, they would have already come. Oswin Frost spoke next, his voice flat and clinical, the kind of voice that made decisions about lives as if reading numbers off a ledger. Or perhaps he was left there on purpose, discarded. Which raises its own questions about what kind of blood runs through him, and why his own kin did not want the burden. The words landed like a slap, and Elena felt anger rise hot and fast in her chest. You would judge a 10-year-old child for choices made by people he cannot even remember? He nearly died. He still barely speaks. And instead of asking how to help him heal, all any of you can ask is what he might cost us. Silence settled over the hall for a moment, broken only by Victor's low, humorless laugh. You speak boldly for someone with so little standing here, he said. Careful, Elena. Compassion is admirable in small doses. In large ones it becomes foolishness, and foolishness makes a pack vulnerable. Then, perhaps this pack could use a little more foolishness, Elena said, if the alternative is what I have witnessed in this hall today. She did not wait to be dismissed. She turned and walked out, her heart pounding, fully aware that she had likely made her position among the elders even worse than before, but she found she did not regret a single word. The following days brought new forms of quiet punishment. Her food rations were reduced under the excuse of resource management. Her assigned duties doubled, as though the pack wished to keep her too exhausted to spend time with Kale at all. Other pack members who had once been friendly with her now found reasons to avoid her company, unwilling to be associated with someone so openly out of favor with the elders. Elena bore all of it without complaint, continuing her extra duties during the day and returning each evening to sit with Kale, teaching him small things, the names of plants growing near the healer's window, simple counting games, gentle stories meant to ease him into sleep. Slowly, painfully slowly, he began to open up in small ways. He started to smile occasionally, a small flickering thing that vanished quickly, as if he were not yet sure it was safe to let it stay. One afternoon, while Elena was hauling water from the well as part of her increased duties, a group of younger pack members gathered nearby, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. She really thinks that thing is worth losing her place over, one of them said. She probably feels sorry for it because no one else looks at her either, another added, and a ripple of laughter followed. Elena kept her eyes on the water bucket, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted, though the words still found their mark somewhere deep inside her chest. She had spent her whole life at the edges of Blackthorn, tolerated rather than valued, and she had long ago made peace with that quiet loneliness. But hearing it spoken aloud so casually, used as a weapon against a suffering child who had done nothing wrong, made something in her harden with a different kind of resolve. That evening, she found Kale sitting by the window as usual, but his small shoulders were tense, his eyes fixed on something outside. What is it? She asked, kneeling beside him. They do not want me here, he said quietly, without looking at her. I heard them, outside, talking about me. Elena's chest tightened. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that the whispers had not yet reached him directly. Kale, listen to me. What they say does not decide your worth. It never has, and it never will. But it decides yours, he said, finally turning to look at her, his young eyes carrying a weight far too heavy for a child his age. They are angry with you because of me. Elena took his small hands in hers, holding them steady. I chose this, Kale. Every part of it. I would choose it again without hesitation, no matter what anyone in this pack says or thinks. Do you understand me? He studied her face for a long moment, searching for any sign that she meant something other than what she said, before he gave a small, uncertain nod. Good, Elena said gently. Now, would you like to hear the rest of that story from last night, about the fox who outsmarted the hunters? A small, real smile touched his lips this time, one that lingered a little longer than before, and for a moment the weight of the pack's cruelty outside those walls felt just slightly easier to carry. Not everyone in Blackthorn shared the elders' hostility, however. Dorothy remained steadily kind, and a young pack member named Iris Bellamy, who worked alongside Elena in the kitchens, began quietly leaving extra portions of food near Elena's station without a word, glancing away whenever Elena noticed and tried to thank her. You did not have to do that, Elena said one evening, catching Iris before she could slip away. Iris shrugged, though her eyes were kind. Someone should feed the only person in this pack brave enough to do what the rest of us were too afraid to do. I saw that boy the day you brought him in. He looked like he had already given up on being saved. You did not give up on him. That matters, whatever the elders say. It was such a small kindness, but it steadied something in Elena that had been quietly fraying at the edges. She was not entirely alone, even if it felt that way most days. Weeks passed, and Kale continued to heal, both in body and in the slow, careful way children heal when they have finally found somewhere safe to stop being afraid. He began following Elena during her chores when permitted, watching everything with a quiet, careful attention that seemed far too focused for a boy his age. He noticed patterns in the guards' rotations, memorized the layout of the pack grounds within days, and once corrected an older trainee's stance during archery practice with a simple, almost offhand comment that left the trainee staring at him in stunned silence. Elena noticed these things too, small strange details that did not quite fit the picture of an ordinary lost child, but she pushed the thought aside each time, telling herself it was simply the sharpness that came from a childhood spent surviving alone. She had no reason yet to imagine anything more. She could not have known that the whispers spreading through Blackthorn's halls were about to be dwarfed entirely by whispers spreading through the wider kingdom itself, carried on the wind from courts far beyond their borders, where an alpha king had spent years quietly searching for a son the world believed long lost. Spring arrived slowly over Blackthorn territory, melting the last of the frost from the training grounds, and with it came a change in Cale that even Elena had not expected. He had grown taller in the months since she found him, filling out from the starved, brittle boy she had carried through the gates into someone with steady legs and clear, watchful eyes. He still spoke carefully, choosing his words the way someone tests the strength of ice before stepping onto it, but he spoke more now, and sometimes he even laughed, a bright, surprised sound that always seemed to catch him off guard as much as it delighted Elena. But it was during a routine training exercise near the eastern fence that the first truly strange incident occurred. The younger pack members were practicing basic combat drills under the supervision of a senior trainer named Callum Reese, a broad, patient man who had grown fond of Cale despite the boy's outsider status. Cale was permitted to watch from the sidelines, as he was not yet formally part of the pack and therefore not entitled to full training, though Callum often let him try simple exercises when the elders were not around to object. That afternoon, a much older and larger boy named Perrin Voss, easily 13 and already showing signs of an aggressive temperament that made the younger trainees wary of him, decided to make sport of Cale in front of the others. "Let us see what the stray can do," Perrin said, grabbing a wooden practice sword from the rack and tossing a second one toward Cale's feet. "Come on then, show us why she risked everything for you." Callum stepped forward immediately. "Perrin, that is enough. He has had no training." "It is just wooden swords," Perrin said, grinning. "No harm in a friendly match." Cale looked down at the sword by his feet, then up at Perrin's confident, sneering face, and something shifted in his posture that Elena, watching from the edge of the yard, would later struggle to describe. It was not fear. It was something closer to calm readiness, an eerie stillness that did not belong on the face of a boy who had never held a weapon before in his life. He picked up the sword. What followed lasted less than a minute, but it left every witness in stunned silence. Perrin lunged first, expecting an easy victory, but Cale moved with an economy of motion that seemed impossible for someone his age and size, sidestepping the strike and redirecting Perrin's own momentum against him with a controlled push that sent the older boy stumbling into the dirt. Perrin scrambled up, red-faced and furious, swinging harder this time, but again Cale slipped past the attack with barely a shift of his weight, disarming Perrin with a single precise motion that sent the wooden sword spinning out of his hands. Silence fell over the training yard. Callum stared at Cale with wide eyes, his mouth slightly open. "Where did you learn that?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than usual. Cale looked down at the sword still in his own hand, as if seeing it for the first time, confusion crossing his young face. "I do not know," he said honestly. "It just felt like the right way to move." Perrin, humiliated in front of the other trainees, stormed off without another word. But the incident spread through the pack faster than any story before it. By evening, everyone knew that the stray boy had disarmed a trainee 3 years his senior without ever having held a weapon, and the whispers took on a new, uneasy edge. "Something is not right about that child," one elder was overheard saying in the dining hall. "Perhaps Oswin was correct," another added. "Perhaps his own people abandoned him for reasons we do not yet understand." Elena found Cale sitting alone that evening in the small garden behind the healer's quarters, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Are you all right?" she asked, sitting down beside him on the cool grass. "They are all looking at me differently now," Cale said quietly. Even Callum looked scared. "Not scared of you," Elena said gently, though she was not entirely certain that was true. "Surprised, maybe. People do not always know how to react to something they do not understand." "I do not understand it either," Cale admitted, his voice small. "I did not think about what I was doing. My body just knew. Is that strange?" Elena considered her answer carefully before speaking. The world is full of strange things, Kale. Some children are simply faster or stronger or more naturally gifted than others. It does not make you dangerous. It makes you talented. He looked at her, searching her face the way he always did when he needed to know if she truly believed her own words. Whatever he found there seemed to reassure him slightly, and his shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Will they send me away now?" he asked. "Because I am different." The question struck Elena harder than she expected. "No," she said firmly, taking his hand in hers. "I promise you, Kale, as long as I have any say in this pack, you are not going anywhere. Whatever strange skill lives in your hands, it does not change who you are to me." He leaned his small frame against her side, and they sat together in the quiet garden as the evening settled into darkness, neither of them speaking further, though Elena's mind churned with questions she did not yet have answers to. The incident with Perrin was not the last strange occurrence that spring. A week later, during a sudden storm that knocked out several of the pack's lantern lines along the eastern wall, Kale was the one who noticed the flooding creek rising dangerously close to the lower storage cellars before any adult had registered the danger, alerting Dorothy in time to move critical medical supplies before the water reached them. His instincts seemed to operate on a level far beyond his years, sensing danger and understanding patterns with an ease that unsettled even those who tried to remain neutral about his presence. Then there was the matter of the wolves themselves. Blackthorn kept a small enclosure of trained scout wolves near the northern fence, animals bred for tracking and border patrol, generally wary of strangers and prone to snarling at anyone unfamiliar who approached too closely. Yet whenever Kale passed near the enclosure, the wolves grew unusually calm, several of them lowering their heads in a gesture that trainers privately admitted looked remarkably like submission, the kind normally reserved only for pack leadership of significant standing. Victor Hale, upon hearing of this particular detail, visited the enclosure himself one afternoon to see it firsthand, standing at a distance and watching as Kale walked past on an errand for Dorothy. The scout wolves, usually alert and tense around any presence other than their handlers, settled almost immediately, several lying down entirely, tails still, eyes fixed on the boy with an attentiveness that had nothing to do with threat. Victor said nothing about what he witnessed that day, but something in his expression had shifted, calculation replacing his usual dismissive contempt, though Elena would not learn the full weight of that shift until much later. For now, the pack simply grew quieter around Kale, the mockery softening into something more careful, almost wary, as if the very children who had once whispered cruel things behind his back were beginning to sense, without quite understanding why, that they might have misjudged exactly what kind of boy Elena had carried out of those frozen woods months before. Elena noticed the shift too, and while part of her welcomed the reduction in outright cruelty, another part of her felt a growing unease she could not quite name. Kale was healing, growing, becoming more himself with each passing week, and yet the more himself he became, the more it seemed the world around them was preparing for something neither of them yet understood. That unease deepened one quiet evening when a small envoy of unfamiliar wolves appeared at Blackthorn's southern border, requesting audience with the pack elders under the banner of the Silver Crown Kingdom, the ruling seat that oversaw every pack territory for hundreds of miles in every direction. No one in Blackthorn had received a royal envoy in living memory, and the sudden, unexplained visit sent a ripple of nervous speculation through every corner of the pack grounds. Elena watched from a distance as the envoy was led into the great hall, her heart pounding with a feeling she could not fully explain, some instinct whispering that whatever business had brought royal wolves to their quiet, unremarkable territory, it was not going to remain unremarkable for very much longer. The great hall had never held so many people at once, and Elena stood near the back, pressed between Iris and Dorothy, watching the three royal envoys take their places before the pack elders, with a formality that made the entire room feel smaller than usual. The envoys wore deep gray cloaks marked with a silver crest, a crown wrapped in wolf laurel, the symbol of the kingdom that ruled over every pack in the land, including Blackthorn, though the ruling family rarely involved itself directly in the affairs of smaller territories. Their leader, a tall, composed woman introduced as Commander Wren Ashby, stepped forward and addressed Victor Hale and the assembled elders without any wasted words. "We come on direct order of the Alpha King," Commander Ashby said, her voice carrying easily through the silent hall. 6 years ago, during the border conflict with the Ravenswood packs, the king's youngest son was lost during an ambush, meant to weaken the royal bloodline. His body was never recovered, and for 6 years, the king has refused to accept that his son perished that night, sending envoys to every territory within 100 miles in search of any sign of him. A murmur rippled through the hall, but Commander Ashby continued before anyone could interrupt. Recent reports reaching the royal court described a boy discovered in your territory some months ago, found alone in the forest under unusual circumstances, displaying instincts and physical abilities inconsistent with an ordinary child. We are here to investigate whether this boy may be connected to the missing prince. Elena's stomach dropped. Victor Hale, to his credit, did not immediately deny the report, though his eyes flicked briefly toward the back of the hall as if searching for Elena among the crowd. There is indeed a boy in our care, he said carefully. Found by one of our pack members several months ago. His origins are unknown. He has shown no memory of his past. We would like to see him, Commander Ashby said simply. The elders exchanged glances, and after a tense moment of silent deliberation, Victor gave a short nod. Bring the boy, he said, and Elena felt every eye in the hall turn toward her as she stepped forward, understanding without being told that this task had fallen to her. She found Kale in the garden behind the healer's quarters, exactly where she expected, tending to a small patch of herbs Dorothy had taught him to recognize. He looked up as she approached, immediately sensing the tension in her posture. What is it? He asked, standing quickly. There are envoys here, Elena said gently, crouching down to his level. From the royal court. They want to meet you, Kale. It might just be a formality, nothing to worry about, but I need you to stay calm, all right? Whatever happens, I am right beside you. He nodded, though his small hands had already curled into fists at his sides, an old habit she recognized from his earliest days with her, a child bracing for something painful. They walked together back toward the great hall, and Elena felt him slip his hand into hers halfway there, holding on the way he had not done in months, as if some deep instinct in him already sensed that everything was about to change. The hall fell utterly silent as they entered. Commander Ashby stepped forward the moment Kale crossed the threshold, her composed expression flickering for just a fraction of a second into something far less controlled, something that looked almost like disbelief. She studied him closely, taking in his features, his posture, the particular shape of his eyes, before she knelt down slowly, bringing herself to his height. "What is your name, young one?" she asked, her voice noticeably softer than before. "Kale," he answered simply, glancing up at Elena before continuing. "That is what she called me. I do not remember my name from before." Commander Ashby's eyes lingered on him a moment longer, before she rose and turned to address her fellow envoys, speaking in low, rapid tones that Elena could not fully catch. Then she turned back to Victor and the assembled elders. "With your permission, we would like to conduct a physical examination," she said. "There is a distinguishing mark carried by the royal bloodline, present on every direct descendant since the kingdom's founding. If the boy carries this mark, it will settle the matter beyond any doubt." Victor's expression had grown notably paler since the envoy's arrival, though he nodded his agreement without hesitation, clearly understanding the gravity of refusing a direct request from the crown. Elena knelt beside Kale again, squeezing his hand gently. "It is all right," she murmured. "Just a quick examination. Nothing that will hurt you. I promise." Kale nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on Commander Ashby, with a wary intensity that reminded Elena, painfully, of the frightened boy she had carried out of the frozen woods all those months ago. The examination took place in a private chamber adjoining the Great Hall, with only Commander Ashby, Dorothy, and Elena present alongside Kale, at Elena's firm insistence that he not be made to face this moment surrounded by strangers. Dorothy carefully helped Kale remove his outer tunic, and Commander Ashby stepped closer, her eyes scanning his shoulders, his back, the base of his neck, searching with the practiced precision of someone who had performed this exact examination many times before, always with disappointment as the result. Then her breath caught. There, on Kale's left shoulder blade, partially hidden beneath a faded scar from some old injury Elena had never fully understood the origin of, was a small crescent-shaped mark, pale silver against his skin, catching the light in a way that ordinary birthmarks simply did not. Commander Ashby's hand trembled slightly as she traced the air just above the mark, not quite touching it, her composed expression finally breaking entirely into something raw and disbelieving. "It cannot be," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. "After 6 years." "What does it mean?" Elena asked, though some part of her had already begun to understand, a cold, dizzying realization settling over her. Commander Ashby turned to face her, tears unexpectedly bright in her eyes. "This mark belongs to the royal bloodline of the Silver Crown Kingdom," she said. "It is the mark carried only by direct descendants of the Alpha King himself. This boy is Prince Kale Ashworth, the king's youngest son, believed lost for 6 long years." The room seemed to tilt slightly around Elena, as the words settled into place. She looked down at Kale, who stared back up at her with wide, frightened, uncertain eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the room's energy, despite not fully understanding the significance of what had just been discovered. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice small. "What is happening?" She knelt down and took his face gently in her hands, forcing her own voice to remain steady despite the storm of emotions crashing through her. "It seems you have a family after all, Kale," she said softly. "A very important one." Dorothy, standing quietly to the side, pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening as she watched the scene unfold, understanding immediately the magnitude of what this discovery would mean, not only for Kale, but for the entire pack, and most especially for the woman who had defied everyone to save him. Commander Ashby straightened, composing herself with visible effort, before turning toward the door. "I must send word to the king immediately," she said. "He will want to come himself. No messenger alone will satisfy him after all this time." As she strode from the room to relay the news, the weight of what had just occurred settled fully over Elena for the first time. The boy she had carried through the gates months ago, mocked and dismissed by an entire pack who saw him as nothing more than a burden and a risk, was in fact the lost heir to the most powerful throne in the land. And soon, the same Alpha King who had spent 6 years refusing to give up hope would be standing within these very walls, ready to meet the woman who had saved his son when everyone else had turned away. News of Kale's true identity spread through Blackthorn within hours, and the transformation in the pack's behavior was immediate and, to Elena, almost sickening in its speed. The same elders who had demanded Kale be turned out of the territory now spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. The same children who had whispered cruel names behind his back now sought excuses to walk near him, hoping to catch his attention. Even Perrin Voss, the boy Kale had disarmed during training, approached with an awkward, stumbling apology that seemed motivated far more by fear of royal displeasure than genuine remorse. Victor Hale, in particular, seemed to reinvent his own history overnight. Within a single day, Elena overheard him telling a visiting trader from a neighboring territory about how he had personally overseen the boy's care from the very beginning, ensuring his safety and comfort, a version of events that bore no resemblance to the man who had mocked Elena in the Great Hall and demanded Kale be removed from Packlands entirely. "He is rewriting everything," Iris said quietly one evening, helping Elena carry supplies toward the healer's quarters where Kale had returned to sleep, still preferring the small familiar room over the grander guest chambers the elders had hastily prepared once his identity was confirmed. "As if the whole pack did not spend months calling that boy a stray, and calling you a fool for saving him." "Let them rewrite it," Elena said, though there was a tiredness in her voice that had not been there before. "It changes nothing about what actually happened." Kale himself seemed unsettled by the sudden shift in how the pack treated him, retreating further into Elena's company rather than embracing the new attention. He found the sudden warmth from people who had once looked at him with suspicion deeply confusing, unable to reconcile the sneering trainees of a few weeks ago with the fawning attention they now offered. "Why are they being nice to me now?" he asked Elena one night, sitting on the edge of his bed while she tucked a blanket around him, an old habit neither of them had abandoned despite his growing age. "They did not like me before. Nothing about me has changed." Elena considered her answer carefully, unwilling to lie to him but equally unwilling to burden him with the full weight of the pack's shallow cruelty. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "people care more about a person's title than about who that person truly is inside. It is not right. And it does not mean you did anything different to earn their kindness now. It only means their kindness was never truly about you at all." Kale was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the same careful thoughtfulness he brought to everything. "Then it does not count," he finally said. "Not like yours did." The words settled warmly in Elena's chest, and she found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "No," she agreed softly. "It does not count the same way at all." 3 days after Commander Ashby's departure to deliver word to the royal court, a new sense of anticipation began building throughout Blackthorn territory. Preparations were made, the great hall polished and decorated, extra guards stationed at every gate, all in expectation of the king's arrival, though no one could say precisely when he might appear, only that it would be soon. Elena found herself pulled in 2 directions during this waiting period. On one hand, she continued caring for Kale exactly as she always had, refusing to let the impending arrival of his father change the rhythm of comfort and normalcy she had worked so hard to build for him. On the other hand, she could not entirely ignore the growing awareness that her own place in his life was about to be tested in ways she had never anticipated. What would happen once the king arrived and claimed his son? Would Kale be taken immediately to the royal court, leaving Blackthorn and everyone in it behind, including her. The thought settled like a stone in her chest each time it surfaced, and she found herself pushing it away, unwilling to dwell on an uncertain future while there was still comfort to offer in the present. Dorothy noticed her distraction one afternoon while they prepared herbs together in the healer's quarters. "You are worried," the older woman observed, not unkindly. "I am trying not to think about it," Elena admitted. "About losing him." Elena's hands stilled over the herbs. "He is not mine to lose, Dorothy. He belongs to his own family, his own kingdom. I always knew that whatever family he came from might eventually claim him. I simply did not expect it to happen so soon, or in such a manner." Dorothy studied her for a long moment. "For what it is worth," she said gently, "I do not believe a boy who clung to your hand through a royal envoy's examination is going to forget what you did for him, simply because his father has finally come to collect him. Kings understand loyalty and gratitude as well as anyone, Elena. Perhaps better than most, given how rarely they receive genuine kindness free of self-interest." Elena wanted desperately to believe that, though uncertainty continued to gnaw at her in quiet, unguarded moments. The following morning, a runner arrived breathless at Blackthorn's gates, delivering word that had spread across the kingdom faster than expected. The Alpha King himself was less than a day's travel away, having departed the royal court the moment Commander Ashby's message reached him, refusing to wait for a formal procession or the customary delays of royal travel. He was coming directly, and quickly, driven by 6 years of grief and hope colliding at last into a single desperate certainty. The pack scrambled into a frenzy of preparation. Elders rehearsing formal greetings, guards polishing armor, servants preparing the finest accommodations available within Blackthorn's modest halls. Amid all the chaos, Elena found a quiet moment to sit with Kale one final time before everything changed, in the small garden where he had once confessed his confusion over the pack's sudden kindness. "Are you scared?" she asked him gently, watching him pluck absently at a blade of grass. "A little," he admitted. "I do not remember him, Elena. What if he expects me to remember, and I cannot?" "He will not expect that," Elena said, though she could not be entirely certain of anything regarding a king she had never met. "He has spent 6 years searching for you, Kale. I imagine he will simply be grateful to have you back, memories or not." Kale looked up at her, his young face solemn. "What if he takes me away, and I never see you again?" The question struck directly at the fear Elena had been carefully avoiding for days, and she forced herself to answer honestly despite the ache it caused. "I do not know what will happen, Kale, but I know this. Wherever you go, whatever happens next, the time we spent together was real, and it mattered. Nothing that comes after can undo that." He leaned against her, and they sat together in silence as the sun began sinking toward the horizon, both of them keenly aware that by the same time the following day, everything about their quiet, ordinary lives within Blackthorn's walls would be transformed beyond recognition. The Alpha King arrived at Blackthorn's gates just after midday, and the entire pack felt his approach long before he came into view. It began as a pressure in the air, a heaviness that settled over the territory like the moment before a storm breaks, an unmistakable weight that made even seasoned warriors straighten their spines and lower their eyes instinctively. Elena, standing near the front of the assembled crowd with Kale's small hand held firmly in hers, felt the sensation ripple through her own body, an ancient, primal awareness of dominance that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with recognizing something far above her own, standing in the natural order. Then the gates opened, and King Alaric Ashworth entered Blackthorn territory. He was tall, broader than any wolf Elena had ever seen, moving with a controlled power that suggested immense strength held carefully in check. His hair was dark, threaded with gray at the temples that spoke of years carrying burdens far heavier than his age alone would suggest, and his eyes, when they swept across the assembled crowd, held a depth of exhaustion and guarded hope that made him seem, for just a moment, less like a legendary ruler, and more like an ordinary father who had traveled desperately in search of his lost child. He did not wait for formal greetings. His gaze found Kale almost instantly, as if some invisible thread connected them across the crowded courtyard, and everything else around him seemed to fall away. "Kale," he said, his deep voice carrying easily across the silent courtyard, though it trembled slightly with an emotion he could not fully suppress. Kale's grip on Elena's hand tightened, his small body going rigid with uncertainty, as the enormous figure of his father approached. Elena crouched slightly, murmuring low enough that only he could hear, "It is all right. I am right here." King Alaric slowed his approach as he drew closer, seeming to sense the boy's hesitation, and knelt down carefully, bringing his massive frame to Cale's eye level with a gentleness that surprised many in the watching crowd who had only heard stories of his fearsome reputation on the battlefield. "I do not expect you to remember me," the king said quietly, his voice rough with restrained emotion. "You were very young when we were separated, and 6 years is a long time, but I have searched every corner of this kingdom for you, Cale. Every single day since I lost you, a part of me refused to believe you were truly gone." Cale studied his father's face with the same careful, searching intensity he applied to every unfamiliar situation, clearly trying to reconcile this powerful stranger with the concept of a father he could not remember. "I do not remember anything before the woods," he finally admitted. "I am sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for," King Alaric said immediately, his composed exterior finally cracking as tears gathered visibly in his eyes. "Nothing at all. You survived. You are alive. That is more than I dared hope for in recent years." He reached out slowly, giving Cale every opportunity to pull away, and gently touched the boy's shoulder, near where the crescent mark rested hidden beneath his tunic. Cale did not flinch away, though he remained tense, his eyes flicking briefly toward Elena as if seeking reassurance. 6 years, the king repeated softly, almost to himself. 6 years I refused to hold a memorial, refused to accept what everyone told me was inevitable. My advisors urged me to move forward, to name a new heir, to grieve properly and release the hope that was, in their words, consuming me from within. I could not do it. Something in me always knew you were still out there. He finally pulled Cale into a careful embrace, mindful of the boy's uncertain reaction, and Elena watched as Cale slowly, tentatively, allowed himself to be held, his small arms eventually rising to return the embrace, with a hesitance that spoke of a heart still learning to trust this sudden, overwhelming reunion. When the king finally released him, he rose to his full height and turned his attention toward the assembled crowd, his gaze sweeping across the gathered pack members before settling, with unmistakable intensity, on Elena. "You are the one who found him," he said. It was not quite a question. Elena felt every eye in the courtyard turn toward her, and she straightened her spine, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of the king's attention, despite every instinct urging her to look away. "Yes, my lord. I found him in the woods near the Eastern Creek, nearly 6 months ago. He was gravely injured and unable to speak. And you brought him to your healer, and cared for him yourself, at cost to your own standing within this pack," the king said, his eyes narrowing slightly, though not with anger. "Commander Ashby's report was thorough. She informed me of the treatment you endured for your choice." Elena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, unwilling to appear as though she sought either sympathy or reward for what she considered simply the right thing to do. "I did what I believed was necessary, my lord, nothing more." "Nothing more," the king repeated, something unreadable flickering across his weathered face. He turned his gaze toward Victor Hale and the assembled elders, who had gathered near the front of the crowd, their earlier confidence visibly faltering under his scrutiny. "I understand from Commander Ashby's report that this pack's leadership was less than supportive of Elena's decision to save my son, that she was mocked, punished, and nearly stripped of her standing entirely for the crime of showing compassion to a starving, injured child." Victor's face had gone pale, and he opened his mouth as if to offer some explanation. But the king raised a single hand, silencing him before he could speak. "I have not yet decided what consequence, if any, this pack's leadership deserves for their treatment of the woman who saved my son's life," King Alaric said, his voice carrying a controlled edge that made several elders visibly shrink. "But know this. Every word spoken against her, every insult, every punishment inflicted upon her for an act of pure kindness, has been recorded and reported to me in full detail. I will be considering it carefully in the days ahead." The courtyard fell into uneasy silence, elders and pack members alike exchanging nervous glances, clearly grasping for the first time the true magnitude of what their cruelty toward Elena might now cost them. Cale, still standing close beside his father, reached back and found Elena's hand once more, pulling her gently forward until she stood beside him rather than several paces behind. The king's eyes followed the motion, softening slightly as he watched his son's instinctive need to keep her near. "It seems," the king said quietly, addressing Elena directly now, his earlier sternness giving way to something warmer, "that my son trusts you a great deal. He has been through more than any child should endure," Elena said carefully. "I only tried to make sure he felt safe." "You succeeded," King Alaric said simply, in a way that 6 years of royal search parties and countless resources could not. "That is not a small thing, Elena. That is not something I intend to forget." As the courtyard slowly began to stir again, whispered conversations rippling through the crowd, Elena felt the full weight of the moment settle over her, uncertain what exactly the king's words meant for her future, but keenly aware that whatever came next, the quiet, ordinary life she had known within Blackthorn's walls had already changed beyond any possibility of returning to what it once was. The king remained at Blackthorn for 3 full days, an arrangement that unsettled the elders considerably, as it meant enduring his scrutiny far longer than any of them had anticipated when they first prepared for a brief ceremonial visit. During those 3 days, King Alaric requested a full account of everything that had transpired since Cale's discovery, and rather than simply accepting Victor Hale's carefully constructed version of events, he insisted on speaking privately with multiple pack members, including Dorothy, Iris, and several of the younger trainees who had witnessed the treatment Elena endured firsthand. Dorothy was the first to be called before him, summoned to a private chamber where the king sat alone, his imposing presence somewhat softened by the weariness still lingering in his eyes from his long journey and longer years of grief. "Tell me honestly," he said, once Dorothy had been seated. "How was Elena treated after she brought my son into this territory?" Dorothy did not hesitate. "Poorly, my lord, mocked in open council, stripped of rations under false pretense, isolated by pack members too afraid to associate with someone out of the elders' favor. She endured all of it without complaint, continuing to care for Cale every single day regardless of the cost to herself. And why do you believe she persisted, despite such treatment?" Dorothy considered the question carefully before answering. "Because she is the kind of person who cannot walk past suffering and pretend not to see it, my lord. I do not believe she ever weighed the cost to herself at all. I believe she simply saw a child who needed help and could not do otherwise." The king absorbed this in silence, his expression unreadable, before dismissing Dorothy with quiet thanks. Iris was called next, and her account matched Dorothy's closely, though she added additional details about the specific insults hurled at Elena in the dining halls and training grounds, the reduced rations that left Elena visibly thinner in the weeks following Cale's discovery, and the quiet way Elena had continued showing up each day regardless, never once raising her own struggles as an excuse to abandon the boy in her care. By the 3rd day, King Alaric had gathered enough testimony to form a complete picture of exactly what had transpired within Blackthorn's walls during the months his son had lived there unrecognized, and he called a full assembly of the pack to address the matter directly. The great hall was packed beyond capacity. Every member of Blackthorn gathered to witness whatever judgment the king intended to deliver. Elena stood near the front, Cale close beside her, his small hand once again finding hers as the tension in the room grew palpable. King Alaric rose to address the assembly, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the silent hall. "6 months ago," he began, "a woman within this pack discovered a starving, injured child abandoned in the forest, with no knowledge of who he was or where he came from. Rather than turning away from an inconvenient burden, she carried him to safety, nursed him back to health, and continued caring for him even after this pack's leadership demanded she abandon him entirely." His eyes swept across the assembled crowd, lingering on Victor Hale, Grace Whitmore, and Oswin Frost, all 3 visibly uncomfortable beneath his gaze. "That child was my son, the heir to the Silver Crown Kingdom, lost for 6 years, believed by many to be dead. Elena's compassion, shown freely to a child she believed to be nothing more than an ordinary stray, has returned to me the son I feared I would never see again." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, but the king continued, his voice hardening slightly. Instead of honoring this act of pure kindness, this pack's leadership chose to mock her, punish her, and attempt to strip her of the very resources she needed to properly care for a suffering child. They questioned his worth based on nothing more than his unknown origins, and they punished the one person among you brave enough to see past that uncertainty to the frightened child underneath. Victor Hale stepped forward hesitantly, his earlier confidence entirely gone. "My lord, we acted out of caution for the pack's safety. We could not have known." "You could not have known he was my son," the king interrupted, his voice cutting sharply through the hall. "That much is true, but that uncertainty does not excuse cruelty toward a suffering child, nor does it excuse the punishment of a woman whose only crime was showing compassion. Had that boy truly been nothing more than an ordinary orphan with no royal blood at all, would his suffering have mattered any less? Would Elena's kindness have been any less worthy of respect?" Victor had no answer, and the silence that followed answered the question more thoroughly than any words could have. "Effective immediately," King Alaric continued, turning his attention to the assembled elders. "Victor Hale, Grace Whitmore, and Oswin Frost are stripped of their positions within this pack's leadership council. Your judgment in matters of compassion and justice has proven fundamentally lacking. and I will not permit those who mock kindness and punish mercy to continue holding authority over others." Gasps rippled through the hall as the three former elders stood frozen, the magnitude of their fall from power settling over them in real time. "Furthermore," the king said, turning now toward Elena, his expression softening considerably, "Elena Marsh will be recognized publicly for the courage and compassion she displayed in caring for my son, at great personal cost, without any expectation of reward or recognition. Effective today, she is granted the full status and protection of the royal court, and I extend to her a formal invitation to accompany my son as he returns to the Silver Crown Kingdom, in whatever capacity she wishes to accept." Elena felt her breath catch, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from months of quiet mockery to public honor delivered directly by the most powerful ruler in the land. She glanced down at Cale, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes, clearly desperate for her answer though he remained silent, allowing her the space to decide for herself. "My lord," Elena said carefully, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion within her, "I never sought recognition or reward for what I did. I simply could not turn away from a child in need." "I know," King Alaric said gently. "That is precisely why this offer is extended freely, without obligation. But my son has made it clear to me, in his own quiet way, that he does not wish to be separated from you, and I find myself, after everything you have done, unwilling to ask that of either of you." The hall remained silent, every eye fixed on Elena as she considered the weight of the choice before her, a choice that would carry her far beyond anything she had ever imagined for her quiet, overlooked life within Blackthorn's walls. That evening, after the assembly had dispersed and the shock of the king's judgment had begun to settle over Blackthorn, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Cale in the small garden that had become their refuge over the past 6 months. He sat close beside her on the cool grass, his earlier anxiety from the crowded hall visibly easing now that they were away from prying eyes. "Are you going to come with us?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain, though hope threaded clearly through his words. Elena looked down at him, this boy who had transformed so completely from the frightened, starving child she had carried through the gates all those months ago. In him she saw not a prince, not an heir to a powerful kingdom, but simply the same child who had learned to trust her one careful smile at a time. "Do you want me to come with you, Cale?" "More than anything," he said immediately, his composed reserve slipping entirely to reveal the raw honesty underneath. "I do not know anyone at the royal court. I do not remember my father, not really, not yet. Everything there will be strange and new, and the only thing that still feels familiar to me is you." Elena felt her chest tighten with emotion she struggled to name. She thought of everything she was being asked to leave behind, the modest, quiet life she had built for herself at the edges of Blackthorn, the small comforts of a place she had known since birth despite never quite belonging to it. But she also thought of the alternative, staying behind while Cale ventured into an entirely unfamiliar world without a single familiar face beside him. "Then I will come with you," she said softly, and watched as relief flooded across his young face, his shoulders relaxing in a way she had not seen since his earliest days of recovery. "Truly?" "Truly," she confirmed. "Wherever you go, Cale, I intend to be there, for as long as you need me." He threw his small arms around her in a fierce, sudden embrace, and Elena held him close, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her not as a burden, but as something that felt entirely right, a continuation of the choice she had made the very first night she found him shivering in the frozen woods. The following morning, preparations began for their departure to the Silver Crown Kingdom. King Alaric had insisted there was no need to rush, allowing Elena time to gather what few belongings she wished to bring, and to say her farewells to those within Blackthorn who had shown her genuine kindness during the difficult months prior. Dorothy embraced her tightly on the morning of their departure, tears bright in her eyes. "You changed everything the night you carried that boy through the gates," she said. "Not just for him, for yourself as well. Do not ever let anyone make you feel small again, Elena. You have proven, beyond any doubt, exactly what kind of woman you are." Iris, too, came to say goodbye, pressing a small woven bracelet into Elena's palm as a parting gift. "Something to remember us by," she said, smiling despite the tears gathering in her own eyes. "The good parts, at least, not the elders who nearly ruined everything." Elena laughed softly through her own tears, embracing Iris warmly, before turning to face the carriage that would carry her and Cale away from the only home she had ever known. The journey to the Silver Crown Kingdom took the better part of a week, traveling through territories Elena had only ever heard described in stories, past mountain ranges and rivers she had never imagined seeing with her own eyes. Cale remained close beside her throughout the journey, occasionally asking his father quiet questions about the kingdom they were traveling toward, slowly, tentatively building the beginnings of a relationship with the man who had spent 6 years refusing to abandon hope of finding him. King Alaric, for his part, showed remarkable patience with his son's careful reserve, never pushing for more familiarity than Chaol seemed ready to offer, content instead to simply be present, answering questions honestly, and allowing trust to build naturally over time, rather than forcing an immediate bond that circumstances alone could not manufacture. Elena watched this careful, patient rebuilding of a father and son relationship with quiet admiration, recognizing in the king's approach the same patience she herself had employed during Chaol's earliest days of recovery, the understanding that trust could not be demanded, only earned through consistent, gentle presence over time. On the 4th evening of their journey, as they made camp beside a wide river, King Alaric approached Elena while Chaol slept nearby, wrapped warmly in blankets near the fire. "I owe you a debt I am not certain I can ever fully repay," the king said quietly, settling onto a fallen log beside where Elena sat watching the flames. "You owe me nothing, my lord," Elena replied. "I did what any decent person would have done." "That is precisely the point," King Alaric said, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity that surprised her. "Not everyone would have done what you did. Many would have walked past that ravine entirely, telling themselves the risk was not worth the trouble. Others might have brought him to safety, only to abandon their commitment the moment it became inconvenient or costly. You did neither. You gave him everything, at significant cost to yourself, expecting nothing in return." Elena considered his words carefully before responding. "He needed someone, my lord. It was as simple as that. Nothing about raising a frightened, traumatized child while an entire pack mocks and punishes you for the effort is simple," the king said gently. "I have ruled this kingdom for many years, Elena. I have seen countless examples of ambition disguised as virtue, of kindness performed only when convenient, or beneficial to the one offering it. What you did for my son was neither convenient nor beneficial to yourself in any way I can determine. That kind of selfless devotion is rare, and it deserves far more recognition than a simple invitation to accompany him to court." Elena did not know quite how to respond to such direct, heartfelt gratitude from a man whose power and position had once seemed, to her, as distant and unreachable as the stars themselves. "Thank you, my lord," she finally said, though truthfully, caring for Chaol was never a burden to me. It was, in many ways, the first time in my life I felt truly certain of my own purpose. The king studied her for a long moment in the flickering firelight, something warm and contemplative in his expression that Elena did not yet have the context to fully understand, before he nodded slowly and rose to return to his own resting place, leaving her alone once more with her thoughts as the fire crackled softly beside the sleeping form of the boy who had changed both of their lives so completely. The silver-crowned kingdom's capital appeared on the horizon on the 7th day of travel, and Elena found herself utterly unprepared for the sheer scale of what awaited them. Towers rose from the mountainside city like carved stone giants, and the royal grounds stretched further than the entirety of Blackthorn's territory combined, populated by wolves of every rank and standing, all moving with the practiced efficiency of a court accustomed to order and ceremony. Chaol grew quieter as they approached, his earlier tentative curiosity giving way to visible nervousness at the scale of what he was returning to, a home he could not remember despite it being, by birthright, entirely his own. "It is a lot," he admitted quietly to Elena, as their carriage passed through the outer gates, guards bowing low as the king's procession moved past. "It is," Elena agreed, "but you do not have to understand all of it at once. Take it one day at a time, exactly as you have with everything else." He nodded, visibly steadying himself with her words, and reached for her hand as the carriage finally came to a stop within the grand courtyard of the royal palace itself. Their arrival was met with a formal ceremony unlike anything Elena had witnessed before, court officials and household staff gathering in rows to welcome home the prince long believed lost, many of them visibly emotional at the sight of Chaol standing beside his father after 6 years of uncertainty and grief. Word had clearly traveled ahead of their arrival, and Elena found herself the subject of curious, respectful glances from courtiers, who had already heard some version of the story explaining her presence beside the young prince. In the weeks that followed, Elena settled slowly into an unfamiliar rhythm within the royal court, adjusting to a life of formality and structure entirely different from the quiet, overlooked existence she had known in Blackthorn. She was given quarters near Chaol's own chambers, a position that some courtiers whispered about with curiosity, uncertain exactly how to categorize a woman who held no formal title, yet clearly commanded significant respect from both the young prince and the king himself. Kale continued adjusting to his new life with the same careful, deliberate pace he approached everything, slowly rebuilding fragments of trust with his father, gradually learning the customs and expectations of his position as heir to the throne, though he insisted, with a stubbornness that made Elena quietly proud, that Elena remained closely involved in every aspect of his daily life, from his lessons to his meals to his evening routines before sleep. King Alaric, observing this arrangement, made no move to discourage it, instead, formally establishing Elena's role within the royal household as Kale's principal guardian and advisor, a position that carried significant weight and respect within the court structure, ensuring that no one could question her presence or attempt to diminish her standing, as they might have in Blackthorn's more provincial hierarchy. It was during a quiet evening several months into their new life at court that Kale, now noticeably more confident and settled than the frightened boy who had first arrived, approached Elena with an unexpected question. "Do you think my father cares for you?" he asked, with the blunt honesty children often possess before learning to soften such observations. Elena, caught off guard, took a moment before answering carefully. "Your father and I have grown to respect each other a great deal during our time together, Kale. Why do you ask?" "Because he watches you, the way you used to watch me," Kale said simply, "back when I was still learning to trust that you would not disappear." The observation struck Elena with unexpected force, and she found herself unable to immediately dismiss it, aware, in quiet, unguarded moments over recent weeks, of a warmth in the king's attention toward her that had grown beyond simple gratitude for saving his son. She had noticed the way he sought her counsel on matters concerning Kale's well-being, the way conversations between them had gradually extended beyond necessity into genuine, comfortable companionship, the quiet moments of shared laughter over Kale's stubborn refusal to eat certain vegetables, or his surprising talent for outmaneuvering his tutors in strategic games meant to challenge much older students. She had told herself, repeatedly, that such warmth was simply the natural result of shared responsibility for a child they both loved deeply. But Kale's simple observation forced her to confront a possibility she had been quietly avoiding. "I do not know what your father feels," she finally said honestly. "But I know that my priority remains you, Kale, regardless of anything else that may or may not exist between myself and your father." Kale studied her with the same careful intensity he brought to every important conversation. "I would not mind," he said quietly, "if you and my father cared for each other. I think it would make us all happier." Elena felt a rush of emotion at his simple, generous observation. This boy who had once feared abandonment, above all else, now openly welcoming the possibility of a deeper connection between the two adults who had come to mean the most to him. That evening, following a formal dinner within the palace's grand hall, King Alaric found Elena alone on a quiet balcony overlooking the mountain city below, the lights of the capital spreading beneath them like scattered stars against the darkening evening sky. "You seem thoughtful this evening," he observed, joining her at the railing. Elena considered how much to reveal, before deciding, after everything they had shared over recent months, honesty seemed the only appropriate course. "Kale made an observation earlier today that I have been unable to stop thinking about." "Oh?" "He asked whether I believed you cared for me," Elena said, watching the king's expression carefully, "beyond gratitude for what I did for him." King Alaric was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the city lights below rather than on her, though Elena could see the careful consideration in his profile. "My son," he finally said, "has always possessed a remarkable ability to see clearly through complications that adults often prefer to leave unspoken." "Is he correct?" Elena asked softly. The king turned to face her fully then, something vulnerable and honest in his expression that she had not seen since that first quiet evening beside the campfire during their journey to the capital. "Elena, I have ruled this kingdom for many years, weathered countless political maneuvers, and endured 6 years of grief I believed would never fully lift. In all that time, I have rarely encountered someone whose character struck me as genuinely, unwaveringly good, without hidden motive or self-interest. You saved my son not because of who he might become, but because of who he was in that moment, a frightened, suffering child in need of help. That kind of character is rare, Elena, and I would be lying if I claimed my admiration for you had remained purely a matter of gratitude." Elena felt her heart quicken at his careful, honest admission, aware that whatever answer she gave in this moment would shape not only her own future, but the future of the family she had already, quite unexpectedly, come to consider her own. Elena stood beside King Alaric on that quiet balcony for a long moment, the weight of his honest admission settling gently around them both, before she finally found the words to answer him. "I never expected any of this," she said softly. "Not the finding of Kale in those woods, not the journey here, and certainly not this conversation. But I have come to care for you as well, Alaric, beyond simple respect for a king who welcomed me into his household. I did not expect to feel this way, and I confess it has taken me some time to fully understand it myself." Relief and quiet joy passed across the king's weathered features, and he reached out, taking her hand gently in his own. "Then perhaps," he said, "we might allow ourselves the chance to explore what this could become, without rushing toward anything neither of us feels ready for." "I would like that," Elena said, smiling for the first time that evening, with an ease that felt entirely natural. In the months that followed, their relationship grew slowly and carefully, exactly as the king had promised, built on the same foundation of patience and genuine affection that had characterized his gradual reconnection with Kale. The court, initially uncertain how to regard the quiet woman who had arrived from a minor territory with no formal title, gradually came to respect and admire her, recognizing in her the same quiet strength and compassion that had first drawn Kale to trust her completely. Word eventually reached Blackthorn of Elena's rising status within the royal court, and the pack that had once mocked her found itself facing the consequences of its earlier cruelty in ways beyond the loss of its former leadership. Trade agreements that had once favored their territory were quietly redirected elsewhere. Requests for royal support during difficult seasons went unanswered with the same coldness the pack had once shown Elena during her time of need. It was not vindictive punishment precisely, simply the natural consequence of a kingdom's attention shifting away from those who had shown themselves unworthy of favor. Elena, for her part, held no lingering desire for revenge against those who had wronged her. She had built a new life, a genuinely happy one, surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was rather than what she could offer them, and she found she had little interest in dwelling on the cruelty of her past when her present held so much genuine warmth. Kale continued to flourish within the royal court, growing into his role as heir with a thoughtfulness and compassion that many attributed directly to the values Elena had instilled in him during those crucial early months of his recovery. He remained close to Elena throughout his adolescence, seeking her counsel on matters both trivial and significant, and he watched with quiet, genuine happiness as the bond between his father and his guardian deepened steadily over time into something neither of them had expected to find again after years of separate grief and loneliness. 2 years after their arrival at the royal court, King Alaric formally proposed to Elena during a quiet evening, much like the one on which they had first admitted their feelings for each other, choosing the very same balcony overlooking the mountain city where their understanding had first begun to bloom. Elena accepted without hesitation, and the wedding that followed was attended not only by court officials and dignitaries from across the kingdom, but by Dorothy and Iris as well, both traveling from Blackthorn at Elena's personal invitation, tears of joy in their eyes as they watched the woman who had once been mocked and overlooked stand transformed into a figure of genuine honor and love. Kale stood proudly beside his father throughout the ceremony, and when asked later by a curious young courtier what he remembered most clearly about the woman who had become his stepmother, he answered without hesitation. "I remember that she never once made me feel like a burden," he said, "even when everyone around us insisted I was exactly that. She saw something in me worth saving before anyone else believed there was anything there at all." Years later, as Kale grew into a young man preparing to eventually take his place as heir to the Silver Crown Kingdom, he often reflected on the strange, winding path that had led him from a frozen ravine in Blackthorn's forest to the halls of royal power, and he understood, with a clarity few in his position ever achieved, that the true measure of worth was never found in bloodlines or titles, but in the quiet, unwavering kindness of those willing to help when help was needed most, without expectation of reward or recognition. Elena, watching her family flourish around her, the husband who had found unexpected love after years of grief, the son who had grown from a frightened, silent child into a compassionate young man, often thought back to that single cold night in the forest when she had chosen to follow a small, broken cry into the darkness rather than walk away. It had been, she reflected, the single most important decision of her entire life, made not with any expectation of reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Everything that followed, the mockery, the punishment, the eventual honor and love that transformed her entire existence, had all grown from that one simple, unwavering choice to help a suffering child when everyone else around her had chosen to look away. And in the quiet moments of her new life, surrounded by the family she had never expected to find, Elena understood that some choices, however small they might seem in the moment they are made, carry the power to reshape not only a single life, but the entire course of a kingdom's future, echoing forward through generations in ways no one could have possibly predicted on that cold, ordinary night when a stray boy's cry first broke the silence of the forest.